Good evening, friends, and welcome to our first meeting of the new year. Many of our pursuits for long-term well-being in our city and region are rooted locally and have mostly local reach. But addressing the climate emergency is necessarily a local and a worldwide effort, and it's going to take all of us to make progress. It's going to take coordination locally, globally, and at every scale in between. If tonight's gathering doesn't do anything else, I hope that it can serve as a reminder that we have allies undertaking local actions every hour, every day, every continent, in every region. They're managing farms, they're revitalizing neighborhoods, they're collaborating in classrooms and on factory floors, and they're urging in council chambers, protecting watersheds, learning in Zoom rooms around the globe. We are not alone. I'm going to, at this point, just put up a few pictures. Oops, let's start on the start. There, we are not alone. We have all kinds of flavors and languages of people doing work with us. The 28th Conference of the Parties on Climate Change gathered in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, last month. It brought together thousands of tongues speaking their hope in many languages. The parties to the Conference of Parties are 198 countries that have ratified the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. They represent 98.5% of Earth's people and have been meeting, as you can see here, since 1982. And these are some of the landmarks on that journey. Tonight, we'll hear from 3 emissaries from Tucson who contributed to COP28. They bring years of experience observing, studying, and implementing climate resiliency measures in various fields of application. You may have heard discouraging news about COP28. How could it be otherwise? But for each heavy foot on the fossil fuel accelerator, there are more hands steering our common life in a better direction. So we're going to invite our 3 speakers tonight to share both challenging and hopeful elements of the conference that they were a part of. Stop the share. I wanted to introduce now our speakers just by name, and before each one has their turn speaking, I'll fill in a little bit more detail. After we've heard from all 3, then we'll have time for some questions and answers. Those questions, we invite you to save them up if you want to just type them or write them down to bring up at the Q&A after all of the speakers have spoken. You could also feel free to submit them in chat, and we'll have somebody looking after those. Our speakers tonight are Dr. Mona Aurora of the University of Arizona School of Public Health, Juna Mikola, a grad student of ecological economics, and interdisciplinary environmental scientist, Dr. Yevgenia Varivoda. Let's give them a warm welcome. Give them a hand of applause, or you don't have to unmute, but you can hear that virtual applause. So opening our program will be Dr. Mona Aurora. She's an assistant research professor at the U of A College of Public Health. Dr. Aurora's research focuses on building the public health system's capacity to address global wicked problems, including pandemics, disasters, and climate change. She studies health impacts of climate change, focusing on putting science to the service of decision-making and action. Dr. Aurora has over 10 years of experience in emergency preparedness, workforce development, and community engagement. Dr. Aurora, you're going to have a total of about 12 minutes, plus or minus, to share your observations from the conference, and then some outcomes that you see, and then to help us envision actions that some or all of us may take part in or support locally. And I will be prompting you with questions for each section. So without further ado, let's go into our observation questions. So we just invite you to speak of 2 or 3 things that you saw that struck you as particularly important in the conference, either positively or negatively. And then also invite you to just share some, if there was one or two key experiences during the conference that you'd like to let us hear about. Please take it away.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here, Dwayne, Paula, and team. It's really nice to see others who are very interested and passionate about this topic. So the COP28, the summit was my first time attending. I know others that attended on behalf of the university. There were several that attended, that have attended prior sessions. To be really honest, when in specific to that question, I think one of the key takeaway messages, and I think for me, something that gives me hope and inspiration is the fact that, we've come a long way. This was the first ever COP meeting that acknowledged climate change as a health issue. Right? In some ways, I think, we're finally there. It took us how long to get here, right? But at the same time, we finally made it. All that perseverance and hard work really did pay off. And now, leaders, industry, private, public, everybody across the board is starting to recognize the need to see and need to have climate or health professions, healthcare, public health at the table. So I think that's a momentous kind of instance. I was there for that specific day when we had some of the key leaders across the globe speaking about why health is important, why it's important for us to really put health at the forefront of the discussions. And this was really echoed by the parties present across the globe. I think, what's really sad for me, and I think for many of us on the call today, is the fact that the United States continues to be one of the few nations that still struggles to acknowledge climate change as an issue of concern. And I think that for me was a second kind of not takeaway point, but something that hit home really well was hearing from health ministers, other government leaders across the globe, but at the same time also the grassroots. There's a lot of momentum at the grassroots level, which I think is a cause for hope also. It's those individuals, it's those pockets of youth, the women who are working tirelessly in agricultural plantations that are really pushing the envelope. They're coming together, they're banding together to come up with solutions. Now we all hear that word, or that common saying, which is no, there's no silver bullet to this. There isn't, but I'm gonna go out on a limb and say there is. And I think that silver bullet is that we have to work together. We have to work together across sectors. And that's my last point, that I think this was something that was echoed throughout some of the sessions that I was fortunate enough to be able to attend and participate in, is the urgency around bringing transportation sector, bringing the ag sector to the table, and not isolating health in its own little bucket. And I think the example that really kind of spoke about this was the continuous dialogue around COVID-19. We can't walk away from it. We can't just ignore and say, okay, it's mostly in the past and, we got to move forward. I think one of the key takeaway lessons learned from COVID-19 is the fact that it showed us that healthcare cannot be isolated to the health sector. We saw globally, businesses, the business sector in specific, the supply chain, all influencing how COVID panned out. And this was obvious in many of the dialogues and presentations, especially by the health ministers, was the need to keep health and embed health into all policies. So a climate and health framing in all policies is what is needed. I will stop here, Dwayne. I can go on and on. I have like a list of notes on some of the things that I thought were interesting, but I want to give Juna and Uvinia some time to reflect on this as well.
Sorry, it took me a while to unmute there. You've got a little more time, but that's good on observations. But we're going to do observations, outcomes, and actions for you, and then so we're going to continue. So, what would you say that a decision or a kind of a forceful impact on the fight against climate chaos was that occurred? Was there one thing that you would point to, one or two?
Can you repeat the last part again, Dwayne? Sorry.
Yeah, just an impact of a decision that is promising to be impactful that came out of the conference.
Oh, wow. Good and bad both ways. I think many of us wanted to see more upfront and firm language on the phase out of fossil fuels. At the tail end, obviously, there was some, silver lining when we were able to, put in some language around that, fossil fuels are the cause of this issue and we need to be doing something about it. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So it's a mixed bag. I'm optimistic, but our work, it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of work. We all know this. What was maybe not shocking, but I think it was something that I going in anticipated, but the gravity of the language and the dialogue that was very much against against everything we believe in, right? Against the whole framing of reducing fossil fuels, eliminating fossil fuels, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. There's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of private industry that is still up against that. And my optimism there, I think, was largely coming from youth. And I'm gonna say that because you see a lot of momentum, a lot of conversation among the younger generation. Not only in terms of, the concern of what their future is going to look like, but also in terms of what can we do? What can we do to take action? What can we do to voice our concerns? And youth around the globe, believe it or not, are very, very cognizant of their own footprints and taking measures, to curb their spending, to curb their, consumption, which I felt was very surprising. My work here at the U of A is mostly domestic. I've done work in Mexico, and a little bit in India, but by and large, my work is here in the border region. And so I often I have not had the opportunity to see that level of action and advocacy that I think globally, these pockets of hubs or resilience spaces are doing. And the last point I want to bring out real quick in regards to that is, if there's anyone in your mind that's really still on the fence and questioning this, I think the place to go and the resources, the case studies to look for really are those island nations. Those were some of the most touching, and I believe some of these presentation panels are actually online. So if I can send those resources to you, Dwayne, if you want to share them out. but the impacts are heart-wrenching. There's communities, there's children as young as, 5, 6, 7 years old that are actively talking about, I don't know what I'm going to do. I know next year if there's another typhoon on my island in my home is going to be gone. I cannot, if I grow up to see children and to have a family, I know I will not be able to live on the same, ground that my parents and forefathers stayed in. And that's pretty shocking. This is just an anecdotal evidence based on some of the panels that I saw, but those are very, they drive home the point. There's a human element to it. There's an economic element, yes, but there are human beings at the end of this wire.
Okay, I thank you very much. I think you've laid out a great overview from the health perspective and of the conference as a whole. I did not get to the actions yet, and I'm maybe if I can just go a little bit on the fly, I'm going to restructure a little bit, and we'll give so that it's a little bit more dialogical. We'll go on to our other speakers for observations and outcomes, and then after each has shared those, then we'll turn to action part, and we'll go through the cycle with the three of you again. So with that, let me now introduce Juna Mikola, who is a graduate student, has received a master's in science and management at Grenoble École de Management and a bachelor's from University of Helsinki. Before that, Juna is a passionate person about ecological economics and finding solutions for real-world development and environmental governance problems with transdisciplinary research. Juna's research interest includes something called common pool resource problems in semi-arid and arid lands. Hopefully have a little bit of reflection on that. Rangeland management and land-based greenhouse gas fluxes, and climate finance and community-based payments for ecosystem services in the Sahel, particularly the Sahel and East Africa. So Juna, can you start us off with some of your observations and maybe a key experience from the conference?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Dwayne. And just checking, I'm still traveling. I have a bit of background noise, so I'm just checking if you can hear me well. Great. So so I'm actually still on my way back from COP28. My background is I've been working on the development sector for a long time. So I was looking at the COP28 basically from the point of view of kind of development finance. And also another area where I've been working it's called nature-based solutions. It's basically looking at how we can use nature as a climate mitigation tool. So that was the kind of the main points we were observing there. One was important for us. There's the article 6.2 and 6.4, which has to do with the carbon market mechanisms. And the idea of the carbon markets is that as we are reducing carbon emissions and also building carbon removal, it's not equally efficient in every country. It might be more cheaper or more efficient in one country to do that. So for instance, the Article 6.2 allows countries to make bilateral deals where, for instance, a developed country helps a developing country to develop like a green energy or more sustainable agriculture or protect forests. So those were the carbon markets were the main things that we were observing, especially whether nature-based solutions are included as one of the climate change mitigation tools. Sadly, there weren't very clear development there. There was a big disagreement on the rules, how those markets should be structured, what should be the regulation. So that didn't really move forward, which was a little bit of a disappointment. However, increasingly, I think, which came out from most speeches and in the discussion was that nature's role as addressing climate change. Typically, we only talk about fossil fuels when we talk about added carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. actually 30% come from the agriculture, forestry, and land use. And there was a professor of soil science, Ratan Lal, well pointed out as well that eventually we will phase out from fossil fuels, but we'll never phase out from food production. So the way we produce food needs to transform. And another thing, which I think was a little bit of an elephant in the room, there was all these beautiful solutions to solve climate change, a lot of technical solutions being presented. However, as long as there's no price for carbon, there's no real incentive for companies to start implementing that. So from the economics perspective, carbon pricing wasn't maybe discussed enough. It's all just beautiful words until we actually have a price for carbon. Now we actually have companies will have this financial incentive to start actually looking at reducing their carbon footprint. Also, there'll be companies and communities which be actually be rewarded from drawing down carbon on different ways. So that is still something which wasn't there, maybe not enough discussed. And maybe the last observation for me was that I was curious actually to find that increasingly COP is a business meeting as well. It will be up to the diplomacy and governments to build the regulation and the framework. Eventually, it will be up to businesses and communities then to implement those agreements. So that was very interesting, and I think it's actually becoming like a more important than Davos for businesses as well, COP28. So this is something also maybe from the economics perspective when we talk about climate change, and maybe that how we should also frame the public discourse that it's also an opportunity for businesses and working on that, working around reducing carbon footprint. It's also an opportunity to build industry and innovate. So maybe framing the climate action also in as a way that it's also an opportunity, not just a challenge and an extra cost. So I'd say those were kind of my main thoughts. But yeah, happy to get some questions from you.
In terms of outcomes, one of the things that was in the news was advancement on, I forget the title of this topic, but it's basically where rich countries are to set up a fund that will help poorer countries to decarbonize. Do you see that as a promising direction or something that a significant advancement was made at COP28?
So there was the loss and damage fund. That was one thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a little bit different from the 6.2 from the carbon trading mechanism. But yeah, that was definitely a step. But I think maybe still a small step. If you look at the funds which are there in Lausanne in the loss fund, they are still quite small amounts of money compared to actually full scale carbon trading.
Great, thank you for that. All right. Any other thing in terms of outcomes that you observed or that you can draw from what you saw at the conference?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Just was there any other outcome or something that we can build upon that the conference put in place, kind of a structure for strengthening the effort against climate change?
Well, I think one thing which was interesting is that even though it was actually hosted in a major fossil fuel producing country, as Mona said, it was the first time when actually phasing out fossil fuels was discussed.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big step. It's been kind of hasn't been that clearly stated before. So that's probably quite a big step.
I agree. All right. We will come back to you for your thoughts about, particularly for, I want you to be thinking about the local dimension here in Southern Arizona and Tucson, how we can take advantage of the gains that are part of this ongoing process and what we can focus on for our region. All right, so I would now introduce Dr. Yevgenia Varivoda, who is an interdisciplinary environmental scientist at the University of Arizona. Her research focuses on leveraging nature-based solutions to enhance the resilience of communities, services, and systems upon which they depend. Her specific expertise includes ecosystem services in food systems, a methodological framework for impact assessment in emergency situations, and interventions for existing and emerging food safety issues in low and middle income countries. Dr. Varivoda has developed sustainable agribusiness recommendations for implementation in Central Europe, Central and Eastern European countries. Dr. Varivoda?
Thank you so much. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for the introduction and inviting us to be a part of your event. So I have like two primary takeaways taken from COP conference. The first one, was particularly important for me is that COP recognizes the intersection of climate, health, and food with the inclusion of the necessity of transition to sustainable, healthy diets. So right now it is on the agenda, and what is important is the requirement or the recognition of regional adaptation of sustainable healthy diet. So I think that like a piece of work for us, particularly in Arizona, can be work on regional adaptation of sustainable healthy diet, and we need to, in order to accelerate this adoption and incorporation of this diet, it is important to develop, I think, targeted initiatives at a systemic and at individual level, and take into account all of our like regional specific features, natural features, existing health, like environment, social concerns, and cultural and economic enablers and barriers in order to implement and introduce it successfully. And the second takeaway is regarding to nature-based solutions, as Juna has already mentioned. It is on a radar now, and I anticipate that it will be huge flow of investments, both public and private investments, in order to implement nature-based solutions at different scope, at different level, and in different sectors. And particularly, I'm interested in food and systems, and in agricultural and food entrepreneurs sphere and field. And the United States government made a commitment to invest in nature-based solutions and to support small-scale farmers, particularly, and local agribusiness and food entrepreneurs in implementation of nature-based solutions. And as I know, there are about 140 federal funding programs that can support this activity. Excuse me, I do not hear you.
Thank you. I was wondering, could you just give a few more examples of nature-based solutions so that we can have something a little concrete to wrap our heads around that, what that looks like?
Basically, it's nature-based solution. They are the actions to protect, to manage natural resources, and to sustainably manage natural resources. And for example, you can use soil protection, you can implement soil protection practices, you can use cover crops, you can use you can apply coverage, you can apply shading, and you can use color changing shading made of natural or biodegradable materials. You can use now one of the like innovative and affordable low-cost technology is biochar, is a carbon-made material that you can use as fertilizer. So it's like a combination of different practices that can support your local natural resources, or not local, it can be different level of adaptation of nature-based solution. But if we'll talk about our local Arizona farmers and food entrepreneurs, so they can use local ecosystem services in order to support their agricultural activity and protect environment.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, let's start that circle round again with Dr. Aurora. You've had a chance to hear your colleagues' input and reflect a little bit on some local embodiments that we can think about together and create together. Dr. Aurora, yes.
Yeah. So I think I love the perspectives that my colleagues shared, and I'm thinking, I'm like, I could probably just repeat all of that, but I'm gonna go ahead and underscore maybe two facets that really spoke to me. And I'm gonna pick on the last comment that Yavinia mentioned, which is about nature-based solutions. I think, thinking about where we live here in the Southwest in Arizona, heat is obviously one of the key stressors, right? We experience the impacts every year, every season. We know this past year was one of the highest on record in terms of heat. And I think nature-based solutions are a key facet to think about and to prioritize in terms of any action locally. And an easy example that kind of comes to my mind is, when we think about heat, we think, we need to think about urban planning and design. Right. We need to start looking at, when we're making these selective decisions on where to put roads, where to build more apartments and housing complexes. Obviously, being in a drought, prone state, we need to think about water, access to water. Water rights are a big concern naturally, but we can take actions to cool down the urban environment, right? And we can do that by putting, rooftop gardens in place, school gardens in place. And those are just, to me, very clear, feasible solutions that can be implemented, because we know that more greenery is not only good for the environment, but from a One Health perspective, it's good for wildlife. You can support birds and pollinators, right? That's the entire ecosystem and the chain there. Green spaces, we know, benefit and promote not only mental health, but also physical health. So those are, I think, some tangible initiatives we can seek out, we can promote, and we can expand on here just within our urban environment. And I think there was one other aspect I wanted to touch on, which was yes, okay. It was going back to something I said earlier, and I think Juna had kind of mentioned as well, which is the need to really not take an isolated approach to our dialogue, to our advocacy, and to really start thinking about who are the trusted agents in our communities. COVID-19, unfortunately, eroded the trust across systems, right? The public health system, I'm a public health professional. Our public health has lost a lot of the trust. But that doesn't mean that we can't regain it back. We have to really bring into the fold, bring into the conversation professions, individuals, community members like yourselves who are concerned. They may not be concerned about climate change, but they will be concerned, or they are concerned about issues that impact their health, right? So a health framing, and I'm going to go and say one step further, health and equity framing is really what we need to have if we want to have constructive dialogue. You know, it's a lot easier to talk to an elected official about, you know, issues that impact the health. Hey, you know, did you know there's a higher increase of obesity? There's, you know, poor access to healthcare facilities or healthy food in, you know, the zip code or the census tract that you serve, right? That's something they're likely to listen to, and policies they could support, and you could convince them. But to have dialogue that's constructive on, you know, climate change, it's going to take us a while to get there. So really being very cognizant of some of those aspects of the dialogue and continuing those conversations.
Did it again. Thank you for that excellent reflection. Let's hear from Juna on how to frame our thinking for local action. You need to unmute, please. Yeah.
Thanks. I think maybe two things that I would mention. One is I'll go back to this, what I mentioned earlier, carbon pricing. Typically, we hear about kind of a need to change consumer behavior. However, as long as those who pollute don't have to pay for that, that will be only like marginal action. So probably the most important thing is as a voting behavior is to vote for carbon pricing, which is happening in for instance, in many in Australia and Europe, and not still yet happening in Arizona. So I think that's important. I would also say that I think climate change is actually an opportunity for Tucson and for Arizona. That's because we are a semi-arid area, and in many ways we are on the front lines of the climate change. And there's a lot of great science and technology and solutions coming out of Arizona, so and Tucson. So I think we could be actually an area that can help governments and other communities to cope with heat stress, ways of managing water sustainably, utilizing nature-based solutions in semi-arid areas to avoid land degradation. So I think we should maybe more, and that would make climate action much more palatable for kind of the public opinion, just to frame it in a way as well that was mentioned earlier as well, that as an opportunity too, and that's what I think it is for Arizona.
I'm hearing a common theme is really emerging of climate change is not the topic. Climate change is in all of the topics of sustainability, and all of those are impacted by and influence also climate change. Thank you, Dr. Barivoda.
Thank you. First of all, I think that I noticed during my participation at two COPs that voices of our local or Arizonian farmers, food producers, and food system actors are quite quiet. So, and we need to unvoice our local producers, our local food system actors, and consumers as well. We need to have advocacy for them in order to let them be heard, and in order to leverage the existing opportunities for them. So I think we need to provide advocacy for them, for our local food system, And my second point that we need to create certain implementable recommendations how to incorporate implementable actions. For instance, regarding to sustainable healthy diet, we need to, as for instance, as educational establishment or as NGO, we need to provide implementable recommendations step by step how to incorporate in reality our place-based, context-based Arizonian variation of sustainable healthy diet in order not to be too general, in order not to be too wide in our voices, in our activity. We need to provide all the stakeholders with context-specific implementable actions, because I've noticed that there is a huge implementation gap. There are a lot of narrative and talking about the problem, the climate-driven problems and threats, but there are less discussion about assets-based solutions. We heard a lot about the needs, we heard a lot about the gaps, but I think we need to provide our stakeholders with assets-based solutions, because we know a lot about problems, but now it's time to put on a plate measurable, implementable solutions, simple, understandable for like small scale food entrepreneur with low income who are working the whole day on the land. So we need to provide that particular person with implementable nature-based solution, like specific organic type fertilizer or specific water conservation practice or specific low-cost rainwater harvesting technology that he or she can afford. And of course, we need to promote and to promote and to have advocacy for health insurance for our local small scale farmers and food entrepreneurs, because many of them, they do not have access to health insurance, as Mona mentioned, they are heavily impacted by heat waves and climate related health issues. So
Thank you. That was a very comprehensive view, and one that it seems Sustainable Tucson, in as much as we can partner with people like our speakers tonight, are in a position to address, particularly focusing on our local assets and our particular abilities to choose the right approaches once we get together. Unless any of our three speakers has another thing that they would like to say before we open it to questions, I would do that. But I do want to give you one last chance if there's a point that answers one of our prompts that you would like to put in before we go to questions. Hearing none. I'm sorry we haven't necessarily assigned someone to monitor questions in the chat. I don't see a huge amount of things there. Someone addressed whether overpopulation is a concern, but let's first hear if anyone in the meeting tonight has a question they would like to raise. If so, just please raise your hand and I will call on you. If you don't know how to raise your hand, it's under reactions. Here I see Garrett. You want to go ahead with your question, please? You're wait, we can't hear you. You're not muted, but we cannot hear you. Maybe.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you for working with me on that, and thank you for letting me know, Dwayne. This question is for Dr. Verivoda. I appreciate your attention towards a healthy diet. And what types of foods can we eat to promote healthy lifestyles and promote a healthy environment?
Thank you so much for your question. There are many different, it is not one specific diet. There is a set of different type of diet that can be used as and can be named as a sustainable healthy diet. For example, as a general example, Mediterranean diet is close to sustainable healthy diet. Vegetarian diet is close to sustainable healthy diet, but we need our regional adaptation in order to incorporate locally grown our seasonal products, seasonal food ingredients into local community diet. And you can find there is a general reference diet called planetary healthy diet, and we can use this general reference diet in order to adapt and incorporate, in order to adapt and our Arizonian style of sustainable healthy diet. So we have a table or a plate with all the specification around fruits consumption, vegetables consumption, grains consumption, protein consumption, with grams and recommended consumption per day. Hopefully I answered to your question. Or...
You did. Thank you.
Can I piggyback on that really quick, Yavinia?
Yeah, sure.
So I think just one aspect to consider when we're talking about sustainable lifestyles and diet being, a key component of that. Some of the work that I've done here locally with the Tana Atam Nation and the Paskayaki tribe, I think one of the things that we lose sight of is there's two dimensions to this. We need to learn from history. We need to learn from communities that have lived in these climate zones for a long time period. There is a wealth of knowledge, there's a wealth of insight that we can glean when it comes to, what crops to grow, when to grow them, what are traditional diets that, these individuals, communities, they thrived in the desert for hundreds of years. And there's this knowledge dimension of it that we can't lose a sight of, that I just want to make sure that we also capture. And the other element of, the sustainable diet is going back to the comment that I made earlier, there's no one size fits all. And that's really true. And one example I'm just going to give from the minimal work, the small amount of work that I have done in the nutrition space is, I think all of us are used to seeing that food pyramid or that myplate.gov website. It's a picture of a plate as a portion size of how much protein, vegetables, right, carbs you're supposed to have. But we lose sight of the fact that that plate is not culturally relevant. I can't take that plate onto the reservation and, engage the communities in a conversation. I can't go to the south side of Tucson and have that conversation because many of the individuals this is not the food that they grew up eating. And I think that those things, the equity aspect needs to go hand in hand with that sustainability aspect. Thanks for letting me jump in, Yavinia.
And like one more final, excuse me, comment. It's like touching the theme for us. It's mostly plant-based. So, and we can find absolutely different, very, it's like a puzzle. It's like a puzzle, but we need to think about from our, as Mona mentioned, locally available food ingredients. Thank you.
I see Sherry has a hand raised. Please unmute and ask your question. Sherry, are you with us?
Yes, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my computer flakes out sometimes. So regarding a sustainable diet, so locally, at Fry's today, they've got watermelons for sale and all kinds of summer fruit for sale. So how does that, because I know that was imported food from other places. So how does that affect the climate change? Does that play a part of a sustainable diet? Does that question make sense?
Is there a person that you'd like to direct that to?
Oh, no. It's just food for thought when they're considering a sustainable diet, then should we consider stopping the import of food that's not in season? Just a question. Would it help the climate if we stopped importing food out of season?
May I answer? Just probably just one part. Yes, absolutely. You are absolutely right, because imported food increase our carbon footprint. But our present day situation is that we are heavily rely on food import. We need this food import in order to ensure food security for people. So we cannot completely, present day, we cannot completely reject and abandon food import in order to mitigate our food miles and carbon footprint. But we can to do step by step small action in order to incorporate our locally grown food and to make this to make this food available on our shelves at the grocery stores. For instance, in Singapore, they have their governmental supported program 30 by 30. They're going to produce 30% of their food calories requirements by 2030 inside of their country to minimize their food import. Probably we need something ambitious, equally ambitious for our, I don't know, regional or to some local. It can be our to some local ambition to minimize and to decrease food import and to increase our food independence. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Juna, did you have something to answer to that question also, or were you going in a new direction?
Yeah, I can maybe add there. So from the economics perspective, we think that the prices of the products reflect the costs that being involved in producing those products. And now, for instance, if we, let's say when an imported food, a lot of there's maybe more carbon emissions. So when we actually incorporate the price of those emissions into the product, that may make local products more competitive, because one of the main reasons is why we don't consume more local products is that maybe the imported products are cheaper. But as we incorporate the true cost of those emissions into the products, that might make local products more competitive. And also, when we look at the kind of the diets, I think it's also important not only to notice the differences in between the products, but also within the products. There's not just a one way of producing chicken or wheat or beef. So we should look at each supply chain, look at the carbon footprint of that product and that supply chain, and then maybe incorporate those carbon emissions into the price of that product. So now we give right type of incentives for consumers as well. And the price would be basically signaling that what is better for climate and what is not. So just a kind of maybe an economic perspective on that.
Thank you, Juna.
And Trace or Paula, one of you has a hand up. You're muted.
Okay. I wanted to go back to a question that appeared in the chat. Isla was asking about overpopulation, and I really appreciate Juna's response to her about overpopulation requiring population growth connected to gender equity. But I was wondering if that issue was something that got discussed at the conference at all. If you heard people talking about it, it seems like it might be a potentially contentious topic, given some of the, well, given the variety of countries where that people were coming from. And I actually had a second question, which was if there were any particular activities that you heard about going on from some of the youth, which struck you as particularly important or beneficial. And that would be for any of the panelists.
Maybe I can comment on kind of my reply on the population growth. I don't think it was discussed adequately on the development sector. There's a lot of science and research showing that as gender equity improves and as women are more educated, then they have children and less. And in many countries, many areas of the world, women actually don't even have full reproductive rights. So it's not their decision when they have children. Many of them are forced to have children since they are even teenagers. So it is known in the development sector and it's incorporated into the programming, a lot of development agencies. I don't think the connection with the climate has been adequately discussed, maybe because it might be seen like a contentious topic. However, it is a very important topic. We also see in some areas where I work in the Sahel, where population growth is very fast, but there aren't many economic opportunities. Many communities end up competing for less and less natural resources, which causes a lot of instability and wars in those areas. So I think we would need to find like kind of like a correct way of discussing that, because I believe that would be constructive. So maybe in future that will be more also on the agenda. I hope so, because that at least it's affecting the countries where I've been working, especially in the Sahelian countries, which are some of the fastest growing populations in the world.
Okay, Beryl has a hand raised, and after Beryl's question, there's one from Trey in the chat that I will ask. But go ahead, Beryl, please unmute and ask your question.
Okay. Importing food. If we stop doing that, that affects other countries' economy. So the question is that, has that been considered in all of this? Because of course, if we affect other people's economy, then maybe we'll have more migration, which we're trying to help people to stay in their own country. So farmers are the most affected by that. The second thing is it's a good idea to have grow locally food if the majority of people would even grow a small amount of their own food. How do we do in an educational to general public to grow foods which also affect water conservation and sustainability and when it comes to water, especially in this desert. So how do we deal with all of that if we're growing our own food? And I already sort of know the answer to that because it's kind of a overall we got to get people to do more water harvesting, but it just sounds it's a great ideas, but how do we deal with all these things? Thank you.
Someone want to field those two questions, either of those two?
I'll take the latter, Dwayne, and I'm open to my colleagues' comments on it. How do we get locals to engage? I think we start with youth. We really, and this is, I think it also piggies back on the question that I think, Paula, you asked about youth and conversations around that. Studies across the world are showing that youth are single-pointedly focused on the issue of climate change. It is an existential issue for them, where unfortunately they don't have access to decision makers and the policy makers. And so, you know, educating youth from an early age, we know from the get-go, you know, you send a child home with information on, you know, brushing teeth. I remember that from my time when I was younger. The child's going to go home and they're going to tell their parents, right? They're going to start doing it. There's going to be incentives in place. And so that message then it trickles down into the community. And I think we have to go back to the grassroots level. We have to educate our young, foster that love of learning about sustainability, about climate change. You know, we were seeing a lot of momentum, I feel, already through these, you know, school garden, you know, funding that's been put out, and school gardens that have been, you know, popping up here and there, making that mainstream. You know, why can't every school have a school garden where local food, you know, the 3 sisters that are harvested, those are all used. I think there's more time and resources that can be invested in that to engage individuals at that level. And I forgot the second question, or I would have taken a stab at it.
May I add a little bit to Mana's commentary? So we have absolutely amazing program at Tucson Village Farm, and they educate youth and they educated adult people how to grow food in arid condition, and what is like very important, how to cook food, locally grown food, how to create perfect trendy meals made of locally grown plants. So, and they host cooking classes and educate young generation about like locally sustainable food production and food consumption as well. And just small comment to Paula's question regarding population growth. As for me, during COP, the population growth was accepted as a fact that we will reach 10 billion people by 2050. And it seems like policymakers and experts and decision makers, they just accepted that we will live in an overpopulated world. Thank you.
All right.
May I say
yes.
something? In
yes,
reference to, okay, we're new to Southern Arizona, and we're from California. We're happy to be in this state, and I think all of us know that California has a reputation for overconsumption or whatever. Now, we also know that 85% of the food that's distributed in the United States isn't, so they say, grown in California. Okay, and then transported out of state. Well, the governor of Arizona just recently found out something interesting about Yuma. What was going on in Yuma, Arizona? This is all going to filter back to water. Okay, we know that some of the Arab countries, Saudi Arabia in particular, were harvesting 3 or 4 alfalfa runs a year with our water, with Arizona water, and shipping that food for their cows to Saudi Arabia. Well, that just come to a stop. And I guess there are more instances of that happening in Arizona as well. And the governor has said she's going to prevent that from moving forward. So I think probably one of the most important things about the state here is that water is so limited. We talk about growing food in our backyards or, in gardens outside, so we have limited, last night was an interesting night for us. It was 20 degrees last night, which is maybe an oddity. I don't know, but it killed half of our yard. But nevertheless, these odd things are happening. And I see people here in the audio or in the group, they're cold, they're conserving energy. And I can see that some people have their scarves on and their robes and what have you, which is a great thing because we do the same thing in the house here. But more importantly, again, it goes right back to water. And there was a report tonight on the news. Here we go. On the news fresh tonight about water that we as consumers run out and spend $1.69 on a plastic bottle that houses our water. But yet that water is now contaminated with nano bits of plastic in the bottled water that people are buying, from Nestle's and what's the other? Suez is another big
So is there a question that you can put on to sort of summarize some of the things you?
Well, the question is, everybody here should realize that the most important commodity in the state of Arizona would be water, and that water coming in from the Colorado River and its distribution where does it go? There's my question. How do we prevent that water from being distributed outside of the state?
Anybody want to address that one?
Well, somebody brought up the idea that if we, were growing our food here, it was going to mess up somebody else's.
I think Juna has unmuted. Let's see if he has an answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I can maybe mention that it's actually a funny thing. Before coming to Arizona, I worked in North Africa, and a lot of the groundwater in North Africa was used to produce alfalfa as a feed for dairies in the Gulf states. And I came to Arizona, and it's the same thing here. I think the problem there with water is that the way we value groundwater and allocate the rights is quite old, and it's not been updated for the era of resource scarcity where we live. So a lot comes down there. You can just buy a lot of land and then basically pump most of the groundwater away from that. That's also where University of Arizona has done a lot of work on kind of looking at what should we do that we value that resource adequately so that it's not being used in a wasteful way. But the challenge there is it's difficult to address those rights because they've been there for hundreds of years. And once you start doing that, you face also a lot of opposition. And I think there's probably hundreds of litigations happening on the kind of the water rights with the water rights on the courts right now. But yeah, very good point about the water.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you will allow me to add
Briefly, because we're at the end of our hour, but go ahead.
Probably like the solution for water issues can be in technologies and innovations like moist harvesting technology from air. And there are many different technology, tech innovation that probably will help us in future to solve this problem. But today, these kind of technologies are quite expensive and unaffordable for our small-scale food producers. But if we will take a large-scale growers, probably they will implement some innovative technologies in order to conserve and use water efficiently. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask the one question that I had left, and I'm going to invite 1 minute answers from any of you who, for a 1 minute answer from whoever takes this. What advice would you give someone looking to pursue an environmental science degree, wanting to really get involved in solving the issues we face? Thank you. That's from Trey B. Anybody want to try to give a quick one answer to that?
I think that would be a good pursuit, to be honest with you. I think we need more people, younger people, at the forefront, seeking out
Yes,
new
we heard a lot
technology.
about the power and the motivations that are in the youth. Let's leave it on that note. And I think at this point, I'm going to invite Paula to invite and or share any announcements that we have from or for the Sustainable Tucson community.